Well, good afternoon to everyone who is now joining us for our webinar today. This is the partnership between the Georgia Career Development Association and PayScale.com's Lydia Frank, who is the Senior Director of Editorial and Marketing for PayScale. She is going to be discussing current trends in compensation today, practice of salary negotiation, and essentially overviewing services that PayScale provides, of which many of us refer our clientele to be able to evaluate job offers and salaries. So without further ado, I'm going to have Lydia begin. Just a quick housekeeping note. As those of you who have just logged in may have noticed, there are a lot of Matt Hendersons logged into the system. This is simply an issue with WebEx. You are still visible in here. You need to be able to hear us, turn your sound on, as well as click the audio button on your computer should you wish to use your microphone. And anyone who has microphone capability, I ask that you please keep that mute for the time being until the end portion when we do a Q&A, and Lydia has opened that up for opportunities to ask her questions. So without further ado, thank you again, Lydia, for being here. We are so grateful, the Georgia Career Development Association, on behalf of the board and all of you participating today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Lydia, you're ready to get started.
All right, great, thank you. So what I'm going to do today is kind of give you an introduction of PayScale and what we do, talk a little bit about the services we have available and tools we have available, and then also kind of do a little bit of a high level in terms of what's going on with salaries currently out there in the world, things to be aware of when you're talking to folks who are negotiating salaries, and also talk a little bit about the types of advice that we give. I'm sure a lot of it is the same types of advice that you give, but there's definitely some I would say bits of feedback that have become pretty clear that are useful currently. And I would love to hear from all of you on that as well. We're always learning in that area also. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me see here. So just quickly on PayScale. PayScale has been a company since 2002. We basically crowdsource salary data directly from individual workers. Come to our site, fill out a survey, tell us about their job, their employer, their industry, a number of different kind of factors that could influence compensation, and they tell us about their compensation as well. And we use that data to do a couple things. So we provide a free report back to individuals to show them how they're being paid comparatively to people like them, same job, same location, same education, all of those potentially factors that could influence pay. And then we also use the data to create a software product for employers, which they use to set pay for their employees. So that same database we're using both on the employee and employer side. We have about 100 business customers at this point. You see some of their logos below here on the slide, who use our software to set pay for their own employees and understand the range for different positions. The data undergoes rigorous validation checks, both kind of manual and automated checks. We have a database at this point of about 54 million salary profiles that we've collected over the years, and collect millions more kind of each year. And because of that, we're able to kind of add questions, test questions, try to understand even more for particular positions what may be most impactful to pay. And that's kind of the high level. So getting into the details, the free salary report for individuals, the way it works, they come to the site, to payscale.com, and can take the survey. There's a few different paths through the survey. You can kind of the most non-committal level is you can do a little bit of research. If you're researching a job that's not your own, you're interested in switching careers or maybe making a move, you can kind of go through the survey without actually entering salary data and just get a little bit of information. You can also go through and tell us about your current job and get an evaluation about how you're being paid currently, or you can also evaluate a job offer. If you have an offer on the table and you want to get an understanding if it's a fair offer, that is also another path through the survey. At the end of the survey, you immediately get a report on screen showing you how your pay compares to people like you. And there's a lot of other kind of features in that report. So we look into things like cost of living, if you move to a different city, how would your pay change, and also how would kind of quality of life change, or what would you need to be making in that city to kind of maintain your current quality of spending ability. We also look at some career path information to look at common future jobs for your role, and typical salaries for people who are in your same job. So as a high level, I thought it would be interesting to kind of go through some of the stats on what we're seeing currently with salaries. You may have seen some of the stories in the media recently about this as well, but essentially we've been relatively flat recently. So in the last year and a half or so, 2 years, wages have been kind of really flat. If you look at the kind of end part of this line here on the chart, that's basically 1 percentage point up between kind of the end of 2014 and now. And wages are up about 9% since 2006, but most of that growth happened kind of right after the recession, and then they kind of leveled out. There was a little bit of a jump kind of toward the beginning of 2014, but again, it kind of leveled out. And obviously, this is going to vary a lot industry to industry and job to job. This is high level, kind of all workers in the U.S. So one thing to be aware of too that we really like to emphasize is, if you're an individual, if your pay isn't keeping pace with inflation, so if your annual raise, for example, isn't at least as much as inflation, you may actually be getting a pay cut. So if the number is going up on your paycheck, if inflation is rising at a faster rate, your spending ability, your spending power may actually be going down. So when we look at the trend overall, real wages, when you take wage growth and you factor in inflation, it's actually down overall in the U.S. about 8% since 2006. The other thing that we're seeing, especially in, I would say, the last year or so, is that performance bonuses are really on the rise instead of base pay. And really important for folks that are walking into either a job offer or salary negotiation is that if the total cash comp, what you're going to make, your entire package in terms of annual salary and bonuses and whatever else may go into that total cash compensation is important. But if there's any ability to shift some of what they're offering in a bonus to your annual salary, always better for the employee, obviously. Performance bonuses are better more for the employer, I would say, because there's a guarantee there that if they're going to have to pay out additional money in terms of compensation for employees, it's tied to performance of the company. So that's definitely been a trend we've seen, and more positions that didn't necessarily receive bonuses in the past are starting to see some amount of bonus. So kind of a trend to be aware of. The other thing is, this has been happening for a while, but I think because wages have been pretty flat, recently employers are placing even more emphasis on kind of culture, benefits, perks to attract and retain talent. We have Fido Fridays here. We bring your dog to work at PayScale, so that's kind of what came to mind for me. But this is everything from parental leave policies. There's been a lot of news stories coming out about different companies offering some serious parental leave, up to a year in some cases. absolutely been a lot of kind of emphasis on culture and kind of purpose-driven work. And I think all of that is great, and it's something to take into account when you're evaluating, a full package from an employer. But it also, you're trading off in terms of pay for these other benefits. You just have to make sure that's the right trade-off, obviously, for you. I think that small companies and startups, especially like in the tech sector, can get with that for a little bit longer, especially if there's kind of potential there that you're working toward. But it's a long-term strategy. In the end, every employee needs to feel like they're making annual salary that is fair, that is competitive, especially in this type of market where employment is lower. We're past the recovery stage in terms of the recession. Things are looking pretty good in terms of the economy, and so it's actually been a little baffling to a lot of economists and reporters about why wages are staying flat, but I do think it's because of some of these other things in terms of putting a bigger emphasis on culture and benefits, putting a bigger emphasis on performance bonuses. So see if there's a little bit of additional pressure from employees who start to say, what I really need is an increase in my base salary. And another thing that we've definitely seen is a huge ramp up in terms of expectations from employees around pay transparency. And that's a little bit of a buzzword, I would say, in the compensation world right now. However, the thing that we talk about is there's definitely levels of transparency. There are some companies, there's one called Buffer, where they actually publicly posted all of their employee salaries. Eddie can see them. That's pretty extreme. And they have a calculation, a formula for who gets what and why. Their kind of justification for that is that that's holding them accountable, that employees can always ask questions. Companies are going to go to that level of transparency, but I think there's definitely some steps along the way that could be a good shift for a lot of employers, and I hope to see more of that. In the past, I think salary was more a taboo subject, and the general feeling was about it with your coworkers. You barely feel like you can talk about it with your employer sometimes. It's an uncomfortable conversation. Most people don't really like to negotiate salary. And so it's been one of those things that has had a lot of unintentional kind of secrecy around it, and just not a lot of transparency, frankly. So I think employees more so now, though, are starting to shift in that they're asking questions. They're saying, how do we set pay as a company? What is our compensation philosophy? Why does somebody make something more than this other person? And things are starting to heat up and bubble a little bit, where you have, I don't know if any of you saw this story recently, where there's an employee who actually started a spreadsheet with her coworkers, and everybody was sharing their salary, and they posted it to the internal employee intranet. I wouldn't suggest for most employees that that's the way to go. It's a little, you want to, I would say in most cases, probably stay in the good graces of your employer. But I think there's ways to start asking questions about that to your manager, your HR department, that are more collaborative, rather than kind of trying to tell your coworkers about what they may be making. Because the danger in that is that there can be a lot of misinformation there. If you're only asking coworkers, you actually know what the market is paying, you know what your employer is paying. So if your company, for example, is underpaying across the board, you're not necessarily getting the full picture. That's probably not the case in Google's instance, but it's definitely important to kind of go more broadly and make sure that you're understanding the range for your position outside of the direct context of who's next to you in the cubicle. And something that we've looked at recently, and this is actually PayScale data, some surveying of folks kind of taking the survey to get a sense of what they believed they were being paid at market, competitively, or below market or above market. Looked at how they actually were being paid. And it turns out that most people have no idea whether they're being paid fairly or not, and they usually get it wrong. So, for people that are being paid above market, only 21% of them realize that. And so, I think there's some big lessons in here for employers, too, that just paying someone competitively and well, if you're not communicating around that, they still may have a sense that they're not being paid super well and could get, kind of about that, or there may be some level of discontent. They may end up leaving, not because you're underpaying them, but because they don't realize they're being paid well. So I think the lesson here on both sides is that better communication, better transparency around pay data is really better for everybody. It kind of keeps everyone honest a little bit, and also ensures that everybody has a very clear picture of what's going on. And you'll see here, for people who are paid at market, for example, a full 94%. 94% were at or below. Like 64% thinking they're below market when they actually were paid at market. That is a huge potential issue for employers down the road. So the other thing that we looked at recently, we asked people going through our survey about whether they had asked for a raise in their current fields, and if they hadn't, why not? So what we found is that 75% of people told us that 75% of people who asked for a raise received one, but only 43% said they had asked. That is not very many. So, the lesson here, I think, is it's definitely worth asking. And, people didn't always get exactly what they asked for, but at least they got something. So, I think kind of the overarching theme here is raising your hand. It's worth, having the conversation because probably a large percentage of your coworkers aren't asking. So if you are, you actually get it. For those that don't ask, 6% said they were happy with the salary they had or had to ask. 27% said they were uncomfortable negotiating salary. That's the thing we hear a lot. 19% said didn't want to be perceived as pushy. 8% said they were worried about losing their job. So there's a lot of fear, around why people don't ask. And some of these numbers were pretty interesting when you sliced them by gender or by generation. There was a lot more fear, I would say, also kind of for women around, being uncomfortable. Also for younger, millennials, for example, which isn't terribly surprising since they're going to be newer and have less experience having to have these types of negotiations. But for people that ask, 3/4 of them are actually getting something. And, the reason it's so important, one argument that I hear sometimes from especially younger people who don't feel like they necessarily, if it's a first job offer, for example, they don't necessarily feel like they have a lot of leverage. But, I think the thing to remind young people about is if the employer is offering them a job, by the time you're talking salary, they already have vetted you, they already like you, they want you to come and join our company. And the feedback I hear sometimes is, well, is it really worth, $5,000 more, for example, at this point, should I just take what they're offering me? There was a study that was done recently that showed that if a 25-year-old, who negotiated a starting salary of $55,000, that they'll earn $634,000 more than a non-negotiator accepted an initial offer of $50,000. So if you ask for that $5,000 more over the course of your career, that can add up to a lot of money. So it may not seem like a lot at the time. The other thing to remind young people about is ask for more as long as you're doing it in a respectful way. If you're, being a good communicator and if you've done your homework, that simply asking about whether there's room to negotiate is so unlikely to get an offer rescinded. And if the employer does rescind just for you asking, it begs the question of whether you really wanted to be with that employer overall. Oops. So I was going to touch a little bit on the gender pay gap. It's come up as a question. We just recently released a report just a couple of weeks ago around the gender pay gap. And for women, I think there certainly is a lot of fear that maybe they aren't doing enough in terms of negotiating for themselves. What should they know? What is the truth, around the gender pay gap? So what we have found is, it's complicated. Kind of big, scary number, and it ranges from the most recent figure we have is 74 cents on the dollar. I think that the BLS puts out a lot is either 77 or 78 cents on the dollar. But essentially that number is all women compared to all men. It doesn't take into account job type, job title, industry, a number of other things that could influence pay. But that doesn't mean it's not significant. I think the issues around the pay gap, that big number, are that, more women are in less lucrative fields. So there's a lot of question around kind of the talent pipeline and are women being encouraged at a young age to go into fields like, for example, are we giving young people enough education around earning potential for different careers just so that they have the knowledge, at least. There's also fewer women in leadership roles. So when you look at kind of executive levels for the S&P 500, for example, only 4% of CEOs in the 500 are women. The numbers are pretty low, even for kind of VP, director roles, managers. It gets better kind of as you go down the seniority pipeline there in terms of representation for women, but kind of the top levels of management are still fairly male-dominated, so that also contributes to the big number. The controlled gap, when we look at men and women doing the same work, same job, same location, same years experience, same education, all of those things that we can control for, the gap shrinks, certainly, for that big overall bucket of men and women. It gets down to 97 cents on the dollar. The concerning thing is that it grows as women advance in their careers. So it's actually larger as women kind of move into manager positions, into director positions, and executive positions. It's confusing a little bit because, the thought would be that women that kind of make it to that level would actually be really great negotiators. So it's a little perplexing, but there are some things that we know that may contribute to that. So there's a book by Leshever and Linda Babcock called Women Ask, where they did some research and found that men initiate salary negotiations 4 times more often than women, and they typically ask for about 30% more. It's not that simple. So I would say, you're coaching women. It's complicated. It's a complicated, sticky area. because there's absolutely the factor of making sure that women feel confident going into negotiations. However, it's not just an individual who can solve issues around the kind of remaining pay gap. There's some other things at play here. So, we looked at whether there truly is some kind of confidence gap between men and women when it comes to negotiations. We do find that men talk less often in meetings, for example. However, what we also, not PayScale, but some of the research out there, what they've found, women talk less often in meetings, but they're also interrupted more. So it's a little bit of a learned behavior. Women initiate negotiations less often, but there's also studies that show that women that do initiate negotiations are penalized for it and kind of pay a higher professional cost for doing so. In studies, they've also found that men overestimate their abilities and performance, and women tend to underestimate both, even if their performances don't differ in quality. And so, there's a little bit of a kind of cultural input play here. But, at the core of it, the studies have also shown that, I think it was a study done at IBM, where they found that women tended to be promoted based on performance, where men were being promoted based on potential. And so, they're absolutely, if you've heard the kind of term unconscious bias, there's certainly some of that at play. And it's one of the things where it's not men versus women, it's everybody brings kind of their history, how they grew up, cultural influences to the table at work. And there may be comments you're making about other employees, whether it's coworkers, your employees, your managers, that influence kind of how you perceive them that you may not even realize. And it's men and women that bring this to bear. And in the studies, when they look at study that I'm referring to actually was called Sometimes It Does Hurt to Ask, where they actually looked at, they kind of took men and women candidates, and had them use the exact same resumes, exact same scripts for initiating salary negotiations. The only thing that changed is whether they were male or female. They also had men and women acting as the hiring managers and had them kind of evaluate the different candidates. And what they found is that female candidates were penalized more than male candidates for initiating negotiations by both men and women. And that men were significantly more inclined to work with who they deemed kind of nicer or less demanding women who accepted the compensation offer without negotiating. And so, there's a bit of, it's a little bit of a difficult problem because we kind of tell women to step up and negotiate and ask, but there also are some penalties for asking. So it's a little bit kind of a rock and a hard place situation. What I usually talk about here is history. Every study that's ever been done has happened before today. And, my take on it is that none is going to change unless people start to change it. So I think it's great that there's a lot of companies that are aware of unconscious bias, that are trying to make their employees aware of their own potential biases, educating them on that. I think Facebook even has it's either Facebook or Google has some kind of public-facing bias training that they've made a bit available. It really is a better time than ever to be asking. There's multiple companies releasing diversity numbers that are being very aware of kind of potential issues there. Not being together on family-friendly benefits. So we've seen all those stories around parental leave, for example. And for men, too, there's a lot of companies offering paternity leave and longer paternity leave. So, in my mind, all of that data around kind of the gender pay gap shouldn't keep women from negotiating for themselves. This is some of the types of advice that we can provide to folks. So, the number one obviously is to do your homework. The PayScale is one resource for that. Absolutely, there's other sites out there that offer salary data as well. But making sure that you really understand the pay range for your position and can talk intelligently about that is important. And it also gives you a lot of confidence if you know the number, so that if a number is floated to you by an employer, then you have a good sense of whether that falls in an appropriate range or not, and respond thoughtfully. And the labor market, so when companies are studying pay for positions, one thing that we have them do is kind of identify what labor market they fall in. And sometimes companies are competing in multiple labor markets depending on what types of positions they hire for. So, essentially that's what defines the labor market are things like location, the size of the company, certainly supply and demand for different positions. So, it's really hot right now. So software developers, for example, are in high demand, whereas, some other department may not be as competitive. So a company may choose to kind of compete in a larger, a labor market that's kind of above their current company size, to remain competitive there, but may, set the labor market and the company size at where they currently are for all other positions. So there could be multiple things at play, but kind of having an understanding of, what employers are paying for the position in your city. Are bigger companies paying more? If you're choosing to go work for a smaller company, are you willing to make the trade-off that may entail? Because smaller companies aren't going to pay what bigger companies are most of the time. Are you to move if kind of the salaries aren't in the range that you're hoping they'd be? Purple Squirrel is kind of an HR term, and the little purple squirrel, Esteban Chestnut, we call him, is kind of a PayScale mascot. But essentially, the idea here is, are you unique as a job candidate? Is your set of skills in demand? Is it hard to find? If you know this about yourself, that you're not an easy job candidate to come by, you may have a little bit more leverage and negotiating power than other positions. Industry, that's another thing we really encourage people to be aware of, is what's going on with the industry as a whole. Have wages been on the rise or in decline? What are kind of economic factors that may be at play there? Is it likely to change? A few years ago, if you were in real estate, you likely weren't marching into your boss's office asking for a raise because things weren't looking so hot in the industry overall. And kind of having your head in the sand a little bit and focusing on your immediate surroundings and not looking more broadly can hurt you in terms of understanding context around why your employer may or may not be kind of in a place to talk salary. And also the company, it's always good to be really aware of how the company is doing financially. If you can get some information about what your company's philosophy is on pay, just having about kind of what's happening within your own company and what the priorities are and how they feel about compensation. Are they a company that typically does a cost of living raise every year for everybody? Is it very merit-based? Really understanding some of that, and some of that is kind of asking around, is really helpful as well. There are things that definitely have come to the forefront for us in terms of what we recommend. Salary history. So we really encourage people not to provide it if you can help it. Sometimes it's difficult if there's an online application and it's required, or you don't want to get to a point in a negotiation where it's becoming awkward because you've avoided answering the question 5 different ways and they're still asking. But I mean, I think the thing to be aware of here is that, and the way to talk about it with the employer, even if you do have to provide the number at some point, is provide a range rather than exact number. The B is, what the current role that you're interviewing for is, or maybe it's a promotion. Whatever that role is, the compensation for that role should be set based on the responsibilities for that role, not on your personal history of salary. Because, if your past employer underpaid you, if you're moving to a really different position, there's a number of different factors that could be at play. But really, your past history in terms of your salary has no bearing on the appropriate market pay range for the current position that you're talking about. The other thing to really talk about a lot is that you're your own PR person. Nobody knows more about what you're doing day to day and your most recent successes than you do. So kind of getting out there, making sure you're visible, making sure your accomplishments are known. If you get a little heads down and you don't want to get into the braggart area, but it's okay to toot your own horn a bit and make sure people are aware of the work you're doing, and create alliances, for internally people that can what you're doing to other people, so that you're not the only one kind of tooting your own horn. It's great to have some of those folks that have your back and are willing to kind of speak up and say, oh, did you see what so-and-so just did? That wasn't that great. That also can be really helpful, is create kind of an internal network at your place of business with coworkers and managers, and maybe even kind of up the chain, mentors, sponsors that are willing to kind of advocate for you as well. Yeah, one other thing, I thought there was a great article about this recently, talking about not being tempted to fill the silence. So I think we all do that. You get into a negotiation situation and you maybe put a number out there that you like to see, or you're counter to what they were talking about, or maybe you're negotiating something on top of salary, and maybe they stop talking. They're thinking about what you just put there, but the inclination is, oh, I better keep talking. Maybe I need to justify my ask. Maybe they just don't quite understand, what I meant. So you just keep backing, essentially, and really win your case. So, if you've said what you need to say, let's it out there, let them think about it, let them respond, but don't feel like you have to fill the silence. And then, there is while obviously, negotiating your base salary is always the best thing, that has implications later for, Social Security, for example, takes into account your base salary, not all of the other things that make up your compensation package. So, getting increases in your base salary is always the best thing to do, but it's important to evaluate where you are currently, or other things that are more important to you at this stage in your career. If you're working for a startup, that could be something like equity. You're willing to trade off some salary right now because there's maybe a bigger payoff down the road. Maybe you are a parent and a flexible schedule is more important to you right this minute, and you can negotiate some of those things. If you've asked for an increase in salary and you're getting a hard no after that negotiation, see if there is wiggle room in some other areas that matter to you. Maybe they're willing to negotiate around pay off or something else that's a bit. So, it is important to really think about the full package. And I would say when you're evaluating two offers as well, taking out, what the benefits packages look like. Does one offer a 401k match program and one doesn't? Is the healthcare benefit a lot better at one company than the other? It's that entire package, I think, is important to think about as well, because it can add up if you're having to pay out more in, health insurance, for example. That absolutely has an impact on your bottom line. All kind of tools that PayScale has available. We have cost of living calculators, so if people are trying to, there's a little bit on people's personal report once they go through the survey, but there's a standalone cost of living calculator as well, trying to evaluate a move from one to another, and get a sense of how much you're going to need in that new city. It could even be that you're maybe you're changing, so you're trying to understand that. But essentially, how much would I need to make in this new city to maintain my quality of life? And we give you a sense not of what you need to earn to kind of maintain the standard of living, but we'll give you a sense of how much more or less expensive the essentials are, like groceries, housing, transportation, things like that. Research Center has thousands of pages on individual job titles, industries, companies. So if somebody's trying to do some research, kind of high-level information, that can be a good place to start. Evaluate their own salary. It's always best to fill out the complete survey because we're going to ask a lot more questions and get them to a narrower number. But this can be a good place for especially research about positions that aren't their own, or if they're students and they're trying to understand kind of career path and high-level salaries. This can provide some great data for companies. We have some information about kind of how they pay relative to competitors. Do they pay above market, below market, at market? Typically, a lot of special reports throughout the year. So I mentioned the pay gap report we just put out. We've also done things around higher education and the connection between the degree you earn and your earning potential after graduation. We've done things looking at CEO pay. The SEC recently ruled that companies, I think starting in 2018 maybe, that they're going to have to, every public company is going to have to publish a ratio between what the CEO makes and what a typical worker at their company makes. And that's something actually we've been publishing for a few years, but it's actually going to become law. And we've done things around kind of the issue around underemployment. We've done things around satisfaction or how meaningful people find their work. There's all kinds of things to kind of dig into around the topic of compensation. And so we do a lot to kind of mine our own data to understand trends and helpful information that people can kind of use to inform their decisions. And I would say it is especially an area that we care a lot about. We think that students aren't necessarily getting a great understanding early on of earning potential when they're making decisions around student loan debt. And so, we've done a lot to kind of provide information there. We've actually even started working schools, either sometimes through the career services department, sometimes through alumni relations, through the president or provost office, but whomever is kind of thinking about career outcomes for alumni. We started a pilot program last year where we directly survey alumni using our survey and then provide a really in-depth report for the college, understand what's happening after graduation. So, if any of you are at schools and are interested in learning more about that program, let me know. It's actually currently a free program. What's valuable for us is getting new data in the door that we can use in aggregate to power kind of our products for employers. And I thought, yeah, that's it for me. So at this time, if anybody has a question, I would love to open it up. If you can just unmute yourself and ask a question, I'm happy to answer anything to ask.
Ashley, I have a question regarding female negotiating salary. You're probably very familiar with Sheryl Sandberg's ideology and encouraging women to, when they're negotiating for additional compensation, bring into the request the fact that in our percentage perspective, at least, at a disadvantage, and because of unconscious bias, also at a disadvantage. Does PayScale have any specific tips, additional tips, in relation to the ones that you already gave, to help women better approach negotiation in a fashion that is not going to leave the person on the other end feeling negatively or biased toward that individual?
I wouldn't ever say it's a smart move to raise. I would say that moment you're negotiating with an individual, and so it's all about relationships, and it's all about kind of reading the room. And one thing actually that Sheryl Sandberg talks about when she talks about negotiation for women is this idea of thinking I but talking we, because there are some kind of cultural expectations I think we all have around women kind of being collaborative and good kind of advocating for others, and people tend to respond to that. So if you're for yourself, using we, like my team did this thing and isn't this great and we achieved this and I think I should get a raise. Kind of talking about, I would say also as part of the we, making sure that you're thinking about how what asking for benefits the person on the other side of the table, how it can be kind of a win-win, is also really effective typically for women. So, it's not about marching in and demanding a raise or a promotion. It's about making your case. And I think while prepared and also thinking about how you can bring what's of benefit to the other person or to the company as a whole or to your team because of what you're asking. If you're asking for a promotion, for example, one of the arguments you could make is, if I was in this role, I think I would be more effective, which would be, and I could do these things which would achieve this for the company. Talking about it in terms like that can come across better than, I done this because I deserve it. Do. But, it can be helpful to couch it that way.
Thank you.
If you have questions after the fact, this is my Twitter handle up on the screen. I'm always happy to connect and chat. We have regular chats that we do at PayScale. I think once a month is our schedule now, called Pay Chat. But yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to kind of follow up.
I have one more question that came through from the real Matt Henderson. He's not on microphone. He asked, you mentioned recent graduates and the importance of them negotiating salary. What are some of the things they can sell themselves on, and when should they not negotiate at all?
I think what's most important for graduates, I would say even earlier, before you even get to the stage where you're negotiating a job offer, is making sure that you're differentiating yourself. I think there's a lot of things you can do while in school to, work on internships. Those tend to, really help set you apart in a kind of job offer situation. I think some level of work experience before walking in the door, and some of your peers may not. And I also would say, one of our favorite kind of salary experts out there, Jim Hopkinson, who calls himself the salary leader, one of the things that he says is he has this kind of formula or script for kind of the exact situation. And what he says is basically say all the reasons why you're qualified for the position that's being advertised, but add on this, essentially. Like, I meet all of these things that you're asking for, plus this is also what I can bring to the table that's different. And I think that's the key for young grads, young people that are negotiating that don't feel like they have a ton of negotiating power, is really you have to sell yourself and set yourself apart. And there absolutely are going to be things that make you different than other candidates, and you kind of have to call out what those are. Don't make the hiring manager go search for them. Kind of present them up. And I think I would say the only time that maybe I wouldn't negotiate is, if it's made very, very clear that that's not an option. I always would say still you can at least ask. The worst they can say is no. I wouldn't keep pushing if it's pretty clear that that's not, there's no wiggle room. Like Reddit, for example, recently had this, I think they still have this policy where they don't negotiate offers with kind of new job candidates. And they're probably not terribly flexible on that. But it's also a piece of information you probably have going in the door because they've made that pretty public. So, it's not that you can't ask, but if you're brand new, minted college grad, likelihood of getting a yes is probably less so than somebody that's been in the market for a while and maybe has a little bit more kind of push to get that waived.
Thank you. That was a great response. We've got another couple of questions and about 4 minutes remaining. So the first question is, do you have data on salaries for degree levels?
Yeah, we absolutely do. I mean, when people go through the survey, that's one of the questions we ask, is degree level and major and where they attended school. However, just more at a high level, we have something called the College Salary Report, and actually, if you go to PayScale.com right now, it's linked from the front page, and we have some visualizations and some tables that actually show typical, median salaries for particular degrees, and the visualization even shows, like, if you pick a particular major, how the salaries vary over time for different degree levels. So, like, is it worth getting a master's in this particular field, is the earning potential that much more than a bachelor's, for example. So yeah, that could be really helpful kind of resource for research.
That could be a really great resource, so I'm sure many of us will look into it. Thank you. The last question was received from Lisa Parker. What do you suggest for using as the best resource for screening salaries and determining a baseline in a particular region or industry?
Well, I mean, I'm a little biased, so PayScale is what I'd suggest. So for both the employee and employer, we have resources for both of those. If you're trying to understand the salary range for your position, or even if as an employer, if you're trying to understand, salary range for a particular position and a set of parameters, that's essentially what PayScale does. In terms of salary research, otherwise, I mean, there are other sites out there like salary.com, glassdoor.com. I would say that PayScale has the largest database available, so our data is likely has kind of broader coverage in terms of job titles and regions. Did that answer the question completely?
I have received additional message. Oh, yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Great.
All right, we have just 2 minutes left. Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions before we wrap up with Lydia?
I mentioned alumni being interested in the alumni survey. If anybody's interested in that, feel free to email me directly at Lydia, Lydia, at PayScale.com. I'm happy to send you some information about that and let you know how the program works.
Perfect. Well, just a minute remaining. I'm going to go ahead and for the opportunity for you to make any closing remarks you wish to. But otherwise, thank you very much on behalf of the Georgia Career Development Association to you for this fantastic presentation and a lot of really in-depth resources I'm sure all of us can employ with the folks that we work with, whether in higher education, private practice, or other settings. Again, Lydia has mentioned what her email address is, lydia@payscale.com, should you have any interest in contacting her directly, or we would be happy as a state association to connect you with her. Thank you again, Lydia. I think this presentation was fantastic, and I learned a lot, so I hope all of you in the audience did. This recording will be made available after the presentation concludes on the Georgia Career Development website, thegcda.org. So thank you again, Lydia. Round of applause from all of us to you. It was wonderful to have this presentation today and to spend this time with you.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Our best wishes to everyone, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thanks again, Lydia.
Bye.